Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In each episode of this series, we'll thoroughly explore one book of the Iliad until we've covered all 24 of them. This is episode 2, and so we'll cover book 2. As always, I'll be reading the most critical parts of the Iliad, including all the dialogue, to you from the 1883 translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers. It's available free online since it's long past its copyright. I've linked to it and to several other translations in the show notes, should you like to do your own Iliad read-through. Throughout each episode of this series, I'll go on tangents to explain some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural aspects we'll come across. These tangents are the secret sauce, what makes this more than just a simple audio podcast. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur, and I spend a lot of time researching these episodes, digging into the scholarly literature. Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things they're doing, and as we saw in Book 1, they're doing some pretty odd things, will help us uncover the very human story buried beneath all the divine intervention and over-the-top drama in the Iliad. At the end of Book 1, Zeus was contemplating how he would fulfill the promise he'd made to Thetis, Achilles' goddess mother, who came to him seeking the fulfillment of her son's prayer. Zeus had agreed to her request, which was to cause the Greeks to suffer in the war, but he hadn't yet decided how he would make this happen. Achilles, of course, is the best warrior among the Greeks, but he had been insulted by the Greek high king Agamemnon, and so Achilles wants to prove to Agamemnon what a mistake insulting him was. Of course, Agamemnon and the other Greeks have no idea that Achilles has made this prayer to his mother, much less that Zeus has agreed to grant it. All they know is that Achilles plans to sit out the war due to the very public feud he and Agamemnon had in Book 1. As Book 2 opens, we return to Zeus, who has come up with his plan to at least start the suffering of the Greeks. And it is an overly complicated plan, and not at all what we'd expect. But it is interesting, and it's a start. Now all other gods and chariot-driving men slept all night long. Only Zeus was not holden of sweet sleep. Rather, he was pondering in his heart how he should do honor to Achilles and destroy many beside the Achaean ships. And this design seemed to his mind the best, to wit, to send a baneful dream upon Agamemnon, son of Atreus. So he spake, and uttered to him winged words. Come now, thou baneful dream. Go to the Achaeans' fleet ships, enter into the hut of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, and tell him every word plainly as I charge thee. Bid him call to arms the flowing-haired Achaeans with all speed, for that now he may take the wide-wayed city of the Trojans. For the immortals that dwell in the halls of Olympus are no longer divided in council, since Hera hath turned the minds of all by her beseeching, and over the Trojans sorrows hang. Zeus's big plan is to send a dream to Agamemnon, a baneful dream. This is one of those great bombastic words that I love the Lang, Leaf, and Myers translations for. My old 1947 Winston dictionary defines a bane as a cause of ruin or destruction. This dream will get the Greeks back into the fight, despite the recent subtraction of Achilles from their ranks, and so that might be seen as baneful, but only after a lot of confusion, which I'd have described more as a mischief, which we'll get to shortly. Much of the rest of Book 2 is devoted to the mischief and doubt that this dream incites among the Greeks, both their leaders and their common soldiers. Now, this very anthropomorphic, capital D dream, to distinguish it from the subjective experience of a dream, it's sent to Agamemnon in the form of Nestor, whom we met in Book 1, the eldest of the Greek leaders. This capital D dream seemingly stands physically over sleeping Agamemnon while simultaneously appearing to him in his mind as a dream. That's an unsettling image, a false Nestor looming over Agamemnon while also appearing as Nestor within his mind. Here's the text of the dream and what it says to Agamemnon. It's very creepy. With speed, the dream came to the Achaeans' fleet ships, and went to Agamemnon, son of Atreus, and found him sleeping in his hut, and ambrosial slumber poured over him. So he stood over his head, in seeming like unto the son of Neleus, even Nestor, whom most of all the elders Agamemnon honored. In his likeness spake to him the heavenly dream. Sleepest thou, son of wise Atreus, tamer of horses? To sleep all night through beseemeth not one that is a counselor, to whom the host is entrusted, and so many cares belong. But now hearken straightway to me, for I am a messenger to thee from Zeus, who though he be afar, yet hath great care for thee and pity. He biddeth thee call to arms the flowing-haired Achaeans with all speed, for that now thou mayest take the wide-wayed city of the Trojans. For the immortals that dwell in the halls of Olympus are no longer divided in council, since Hera hath turned the minds of all by her beseeching, and over the Trojans sorrows hang by the will of Zeus. But do thou keep this in thy heart, nor let forgetfulness come upon thee when honeyed sleep shall leave thee. So spake the dream, and departed, and left him there, deeming in his mind things that were not to be fulfilled. For indeed he thought to take Priam's city that very day, fond man, in that he knew not the plans that Zeus had in mind, who was willed to bring yet more grief and wailing on Trojans alike, and Danaans throughout the course of stubborn fights. Then woke he from sleep, and the heavenly voice was in his ears. So he rose up sitting, and donned his soft tunic, fair and bright, and cast around him his great cloak, and beneath his glistering feet he bound his fair sandals, and over his shoulders cast his silver-studded sword, and grasped his sire's scepter, imperishable forever, wherewith he took his way amid the mail-clad Achaeans' ships. The dream's message to Agamemnon is that Zeus will finally allow the Greeks to break through the Trojans' defenses and capture Troy after 9 years of siege, ending this long stalemate. We, the readers, know that this is a false dream, a trick by Zeus to get Agamemnon committed to a battle he's not going to win. But Agamemnon doesn't know this. Now, you'd think, if you were Agamemnon, that with this divine message of your certain victory, you'd just rally the troops and march on Troy with the full expectation of victory. But Agamemnon does not do this. Instead, Agamemnon now takes us into a mini episode that's referred to as the Diapyra, the testing of the army. A lot of portions or little episodes of the Iliad have specific scholarly names, and this one is the Diapyra. Now, there's nothing that Agamemnon received in the baneful dream from Zeus that would have led him to do this testing, because he believes the dream entirely. This testing is just pure classic Agamemnon here, being full of self-doubt in his own leadership and whether the men are willing to follow him. To begin this unnecessary testing, first Agamemnon gathers up just the leaders and lets them in on the plan, what he's about to do, and what he's not going to tell the regular men of the army in order to test their resolve. Hearken, my friends, a dream from heaven came to me in my sleep through the ambrosial night, and chiefly to goodly Nestor was very like in shape and bulk and stature. And it stood over my head and charged me, saying, Sleepest thou, son of wise Atreus, tamer of horses? To sleep all night through beseemeth not one that is a counselor, to whom the host is entrusted, and so many cares belong. But now hearken straightway to me, for I am a messenger to thee from Zeus, who though he be afar, yet hath great care for thee and pity. He biddeth thee call to arms the flowing-haired Achaeans with all speed, for that now thou mayest take the wide-wayed city of the Trojans. For the immortals that dwell in the palaces of Olympus are no longer divided in council, since Hera hath turned the minds of all by her beseeching, and over the Trojans sorrows hang by the will of Zeus. But keep thou this in thy heart. So spake the dream, and was flown away, and sweet sleep left me. So come, let us now call to arms as we may the sons of the Achaeans. But first I will speak to make trial of them as is fitting, and will bid them flee with their bench ships. Only do ye from this side and from that speak to hold them back. To the other kings, Agamemnon says that he's going to tell the troops, well, it's all over, let's give up and go home. But he's first letting the other kings know that that will just be a test of the men, and he's telling the other kings to restrain the men from actually leaving. Why would Agamemnon want to test the army like this? Because he really doesn't trust the army. Agamemnon knows that the army resents him right now. Remember that plague which resulted in many men's deaths? That was Agamemnon's fault for angering Apollo by refusing to accept the ransom for the daughter of the priest. And then Agamemnon followed that up just yesterday with so angering their best warrior, Achilles, that Achilles will no longer be joining them in battle. So before he leads the army against the Trojans, Agamemnon wants to see if they'll even follow him. But will the other kings think this testing is a good idea? That's where the dream comes in. Agamemnon is leveraging an actual divine dream, which he doesn't know is a fake, baneful dream designed to trick him into battle. He's leveraging this into convincing the other kings to help him pull this testing of the army stunt. Layers and layers of deception by both the king of the gods and the high king of the Greeks. And we're only in book 2. In response to Agamemnon's proposal to the other kings to test the army, Nestor stands up and says, "My friends, captains and rulers of the Argives, had any other of the Achaeans told us this dream, we might deem it a false thing, and rather turn away therefrom. But now he hath seen it, who of all Achaeans avoweth him far greatest. So come, let us call to arms as we may the sons of the Achaeans." Surprisingly, Nestor endorses this plan, and for exactly the wrong reason. He assumes the gods would never trick Agamemnon of all men with a false dream. With Nestor's endorsement, the kings now call all their men into the assembly, so Agamemnon can proceed with his testing of the resolve to fight, and the troops now all come streaming into the assembly space. Even as when the tribes of thronging bees issue from some hollow rock, ever in fresh procession, and fly clustering among the flowers of spring, and some on this hand and some on that fly thick. Even so, from ships and huts before the low beach, marched forth their many tribes by companies to the place of assembly. And in their midst blazed forth Rumor, messenger of Zeus, urging them to go, and so they gathered. And the place of assemblage was in an uproar, and the earth echoed again as the hosts sate them down, and there was turmoil. 9 heralds restrained them with shouting, if perchance they might refrain from clamor, and hearken to their kings, the fosterlings of Zeus. And hardly at the last would the people sit, and keep them to their benches, and cease from noise. Then stood up Lord Agamemnon, bearing his scepter, that Hephaestus had wrought curiously. Hephaestus gave it to King Zeus, son of Cronos, and then Zeus gave it to the messenger god, the slayer of Argus, and King Hermes gave it to Pelops, the charioteer, and Pelops again gave it to Atreus, shepherd of the host. And Atreus, dying, left it to Thyestes, rich in flocks, and Thyestes in his turn left it to Agamemnon to bear, that over many islands and all Argos he should be lord. Thereon he leaned, and spake his saying to the Argives: "My friends, Danaan warriors, men of Ares' company, Zeus, Cronos' son, hath bound me with might in grievous blindness of soul. Hard of heart is he, for that erewhile he promised me and pledged his nod, that not till I had wasted well-walled Ilios should I return. But now see I that he planned a cruel wile, and biddeth me return to Argos dishonored, with the loss of many of my folk. So meseems it pleaseth most mighty Zeus, who hath laid low the head of many a city, yea, and shall lay low, for his is highest power. Shame is this even for them that come after to hear, how so goodly and great a folk of the Achaeans thus vainly warred a bootless war, and fought scantier enemies, and no end thereof is yet seen. For if perchance we were minded, both Achaeans and Trojans, to swear a solemn truce, and to number ourselves, and if the Trojans should gather together all that have their dwellings in the city, and we Achaeans should marshal ourselves by tens, and every company choose a Trojan to pour their wine, then would many tens lack a cupbearer. So much, I say, do the sons of the Achaeans outnumber the Trojans that are within the city. But allies from many cities, even warriors that wield the spear, are therein, and they hinder me perforce. and for all my will suffer me not to waste the populous citadel of Ilios. Already have 9 years of great Zeus passed away, and our ship's timbers have rotted, and the tackling is loosed, while there our wives and little children sit in our halls awaiting us. Yet is our task utterly unaccomplished, wherefore we came hither. So come, even as I shall bid, let us all obey. Let us flee with our ships to our dear native land, for now shall we never take wide Troy. Agamemnon has made his announcement to the assembled army, and it's not at all the usual pre-battle pep talk they expected. Agamemnon has told them, clearly we're not going to win. That Zeus, he tricked us. Even though Zeus promised us we would defeat the Trojans, it's obvious now that we won't. So let's all just load up the ships and sail for home. There's a lot going on here with this testing of the army's resolve. And in the show notes, you'll find a link to a paper by Erwin Cook titled Agamemnon's Test of the Army in Iliad Book 2 and the Function of Homeric Akos. Let's think about the situation these soldiers find themselves in prior to receiving this very strange anti-pep talk from Agamemnon. The war has been going on for 9 years. That alone is very demoralizing. On top of this, Agamemnon himself has recently done some stuff to further demoralize the troops. Remember that plague? And then he immediately followed that up by chasing off their best warrior. Getting told now that the war is a lost cause and they should just head for home makes a lot of sense to the common soldiers. At the same time, from Agamemnon's point of view, while he doesn't doubt the dream's promise of victory ahead, he definitely doubts the troops will actually follow him into battle. By testing them, Agamemnon can do a few different things, mostly involving blame shifting. The first and most obvious potential benefit to Agamemnon of testing the army's resolve is that he can simply see if the men are willing to follow him into battle. If he doesn't have an army at his back, he's not going out to face the Trojans today. Second, just in case the battle today doesn't go well and the dream proves to have been false, Agamemnon can shift some of the blame for this situation onto Zeus. That tricky Zeus, he really did make a false promise to us. Again, not my fault. I doubt Agamemnon suspects the dream is false right now, but you and I know that it's false, and by performing this test, Agamemnon is actually protecting himself from the fallout of this eventuality. But there are even more potential benefits of this testing for Agamemnon. If the army wavers in the test but does proceed into battle, and then the battle doesn't go well, then the army can get some of the blame for things not going well, rather than it all falling onto Agamemnon's shoulders, because they'd have shown wavering commitment during the test. And then finally, if the test completely fails and the other kings do not restrain the men from fleeing, then Agamemnon can heap lots of blame onto the other kings. So there's almost no way this testing can go badly for Agamemnon, and lots of potential benefits to him. Erwin Cook gives a very in-depth examination of Agamemnon's rhetoric, how he purposefully deflects the blame for their setbacks onto the gods, who, it's true, directed the Greeks into a war that's lasted 9 long years, much longer than any of them would have expected. And Agamemnon's testing speech has roused the feeling of akos in the men. Pain, distress, but specifically emotional pain, by reminding them of their homes and families, their wives left unprotected back in Greece, and their children growing up without them. But Agamemnon found the men had far more akos than even he'd expected, and as soon as he's done speaking, the assembly swayed like high sea waves of the Icarian main that east wind and south wind raise, rushing upon them from the clouds of Father Zeus. And even as when the west wind cometh to stir a deep cornfield with violent blast, and all the ears bowed down, so was the assembly stirred, and they with shouting hasted towards the ships, and the dust from beneath their feet rose and stood on high. And they bade each man his neighbor to seize the ships and drag them into the bright salt sea, and cleared out the launching ways, and the noise went up to heaven of their hurrying homewards, and they began to take the props from beneath the ships. As it is, when he made his announcement, even Agamemnon wasn't ready for just how demoralized the troops and the other kings were. And this is where the testing almost does end up going very badly for Agamemnon, who was counting on those other kings to restrain the men from actually abandoning the war and getting into those boats that are beached conveniently all throughout the camp. Agamemnon was right to doubt the men's willingness to follow him into battle, but he was completely unprepared for just how much the men want to abandon him and this war, and how eager they are to give up on this whole Trojan War immediately. Following his speech, the men are shouting, they're running for the ships, kicking up a cloud of dust as they scramble to push the vessels back into the water and start rowing immediately for home. Now keep in mind, Agamemnon was expecting at least some reaction like this from the men, and he'd already spoken with the other leaders who'd agreed to restrain their men from actually abandoning the war. Yet even this backup plan looks likely to fail, and the pro-Greek gods watching all this from Olympus, they see the danger. And we scene shift quickly up to heaven, where Hera and Athene are very worried. Then would the Argives have accomplished their return against the will of fate, but that Hera spake a word to Athene. Out on it, daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus, unwearied maiden. Shall the Argives thus indeed flee homeward to their dear native land over the sea's broad back? But they would leave to Priam and the Trojans their boast, even Helen of Argos, for whose sake many an Achaean hath perished in Troy, far away from his dear native land. But go thou now amid the host of the mail-clad Achaeans. With thy gentle words refrain thou every man, neither suffer them to draw their curved ships down to the salt sea. So spake she, and the bright-eyed goddess Athene disregarded her not, but went darting down from the peaks of Olympus, and came with speed to the fleet ships of the Achaeans. There found she Odysseus standing, peer of Zeus in council, neither laid he any hand upon his decked black ship, because grief had entered into his heart and soul. Athene flies down to the Greek camp to seek out one of her favorites among the Greek leaders, Odysseus. She wants to spur him on to doing his job, restraining the men from abandoning the war, because up until this point, the regular men of the army have been running wild, pushing their ships into the ocean helter-skelter. Why aren't the leaders stopping them as they'd planned? Athene finds Odysseus unmoving. On the one hand, he's not joining the scramble, but on the other hand, he's not trying to stop the men from leaving either. Instead, he is standing idle, with grief in his heart. Perhaps he is weighing the situation, thinking about the series of events that landed him here on the coast of Troy. Years earlier, Odysseus had had to be tricked into even joining this war. He, Odysseus, crafty Odysseus, he of many wiles, wily old Odysseus was wild into being here in the first place. Odysseus had received a prophecy that, if he joined this war, he would be gone for 20 years and return alone and destitute. So when the other Greeks came to his island home of Ithaca to recruit him, Odysseus came up with a trick to try to get out of going to the war. He pretended to be crazy. He put on a felt hat, which was apparently not something a sane person would do, and he yoked together a horse and a bull to pull a plow. Also not sane. But one of the Greeks doubted that Odysseus really was crazy. He was, after all, known to pull some fast ones. This Greek, Palamedes, took Odysseus's infant son Telemachus and placed him right in front of the plow. Well, that stopped the crazy act cold, because Odysseus wasn't about to plow over his own son. And fast forward 9 years later, Odysseus finds himself here, standing on the beach near Troy, frozen by grief, maybe contemplating the ignoble fleeing of the war, joining those fleeing common soldiers in the boats, leaving to go home to see his wife and son this very day, this very moment. But it was not to be. He wouldn't be home for another 11 years, destitute and alone, just like the prophecy had foretold. Athene now shakes Odysseus out of his reverie, saying to him, "Heaven-sprung son of Laertes, Odysseus of many devices, will ye indeed fling yourselves upon the Trojans their boast, even Helen of Argos, for whose sake many an Achaean hath perished in Troia, far from his dear native land? But go thou now amid the host of the Achaeans, and tarry not, and with thy gentle words refrain every man, neither suffer them to draw their curved ships down to the salt sea. So said she, and he knew the voice of the goddess speaking to him, and set him to run, and cast away his mantle, which his herald gathered up, even Eurybates of Ithaca, that waited on him. And himself he went to meet Agamemnon son of Atreus, and at his hand received the scepter of his sires, imperishable forever, wherewith he took his way amid the ships of the mail-clad Achaeans. Whenever he found one that was a captain and a man of mark, he stood by his side, and refrained him with gentle words. Good sir, it is not seemly to affright thee like a coward, but do thou sit thyself, and make all thy folk sit down. For thou knowest not yet clearly what is the purpose of Atreus' son. Now he is but making trial, and soon he will afflict the sons of the Achaeans. And we heard not all of us what he spake in the council. Beware lest in his anger he evilly treat the sons of the Achaeans. For proud is the soul of heaven-fostered kings, because their honor is of Zeus, and the god of counsel loveth them. But whatever man of the people he saw and found him shouting, him he drave with the scepter, and showed him with loud words. Good sir, sit still, and hearken to the words of others that are thy betters. But thou art no warrior, and a weakling, never reckoned whether in battle or in council. In no wise can we Achaeans be all kings here. A multitude of masters is no good thing. Let there be one master, one king, to whom the son of crooked counseling Cronos hath granted it, even the scepter and judgments, that he may rule among you. So masterfully ranged he the host, and they hasted back to the assembly from ships and huts, with noise as when a wave of the loud-sounding sea roareth on the long beach, and the main resoundeth. At Athene's command, Odysseus has shrugged off his reverie and sprung into action. First, he ran off and grabbed the royal scepter from Agamemnon. With this symbol of authority in hand, he went on a one-man mission to stop the mutiny, running to and fro among the noblemen and common soldiers. To the other kings and noblemen, he reminded them of their duty, and that part of their duty is to restrain their men, wielding the scepter of Agamemnon as though speaking in the high king's name. To the common men, the soldiers, Odysseus used the scepter as a weapon, literally beating them with it and insulting them until they got under control. Odysseus has been successful in stopping the mutiny, and the men are again assembled. They have been beaten and cajoled and shamed back into participating in the war. I guess this means Agamemnon's authority has been reasserted. Agamemnon as a leader will never meet our standard of a hero. He's selfish and greedy. But through Athene's intervention and Odysseus' liberal hand with the scepter, he's accomplished his goal, which was to establish that the men now will follow him into battle. Beaten and shamed, but they will follow him. Agamemnon wants to make his real pre-battle pep talk to the gathered army, the noblemen and the soldiers, to fire them up and lead them into battle against the Trojans. We're finally about to get into the action of the Iliad. Or are we about to get into the action? There's still one Greek who's speaking out against the High King. And it's one of those awkward moments where a crowd is hushed, but one oblivious person continues talking loudly, too socially unaware to realize that he's shouting amidst a silent room. The oblivious loud talker is Thersites, and the description he's given in the text makes it clear that, in the society of the time, which was intolerant of men who did not meet their physical standards of athletic ability and beauty, the narrator expects us to hate him as much as the other Greeks seem to. Now all the rest sat down and kept their place upon the benches. Only Thersites still chattered on, the uncontrolled of speech, whose mind was full of words many and disorderly, wherewith to strive against the chiefs idly and in no good order, but even as he deemed that he should make the Argives laugh. And he was ill-favored beyond all men that came to Ilios. Bandy-legged was he, and lame of one foot, and his two shoulders rounded, arched down upon his chest. And over them his head was warped, and a scanty stubble sprouted on it. Hateful was he to Achilles, above all, and to Odysseus. For them he was wont to revile. But now, with a shrill shout, he poured forth his upbraidings upon goodly Agamemnon. With him the Achaeans were sore vexed, and had indignation in their souls. The ancients were not generous to those with any sort of physical disability, and Thersites is described as having a hunched back, curved legs, a pointed head, and a lame foot. Odysseus and Achilles are specifically said to hate him. But Thersites with loud shouts spake and reviled Agamemnon. Atrides, for what art thou now ill-content and lacking? Surely thy huts are full of bronze, and many women are in thy huts, the chosen spoils that we Achaeans give thee first of all, whene'er we take a town. Surely thou must yet want gold as well, such as some one of the horse-taming Trojans may bring from Ilios to ransom his son, whom I perchance, or some other Achaean, have led captive, or else some young girl to know and love, whom thou mayest keep apart to thyself. But it is not seemly for one that is their captain to bring the sons of the Achaeans to ill. Soft fools, base things of shame, ye women of Achaia, and men no more, let us depart home with our ships, and leave this fellow here in Troyland to gorge himself with meeds of honor, that he may see whether our aid avail him aught or no. Even he that hath now done dishonor to Achilles, a far better man than he, for he hath taken away his meed of honor, and keepeth it by his own violent deed. Of a very surety is there no wrath at all in Achilles' mind, but he is slack, else this despite, thou son of Atreus, were thy last. So that's Thersites, alone speaking aloud all the complaints about the war, and complaints about Agamemnon in particular, that most of the men had probably just been making moments before. In fact, there's really little substantially different between what Thersites is saying about Agamemnon and what Achilles said in Book 1. Thersites is publicly asking Agamemnon, what else do you want from us? Don't you already have lots of treasure? Items made of bronze and captured women that the rest of us have looted for you? Do you want gold now? Thersites makes a very pointed remark, a very direct commentary that Agamemnon definitely deserves to hear in light of the plague that was due to Agamemnon's greed. It's not right for our leaders to cause us harm. That's very valid. Then Thersites addresses the Greek men, calling them cowards and weaklings, telling them that they should all leave and abandon Agamemnon here on the shore, alone with his treasures. And these are all valid points, sharp political criticism coming from Thersites. But wartime and the Bronze Age are not really great times for expressing differing political views. It's an interesting narrative decision here to repeat the same arguments we heard in Book 1 about why the Greeks should not continue the war under Agamemnon's leadership, but to put these same words into someone else's mouth, someone we're specifically supposed to dislike, in order to explain why the Greeks, spoiler alert, go ahead and continue waging war against the Trojans under Agamemnon, despite the validity of these repeated arguments. Scholar Neville Postlethwaite, in his article Thersites in the Iliad, argues that Homer is very intentionally repeating Achilles' arguments here in Book 2, not as a parody, though, but rather as a further reinforcement of the themes important to the Iliad, the wrath that Achilles feels for the injustices he spoke about in Book 1, which are echoed here by Thersites in Book 2, but also the themes of doubt in Agamemnon as a leader, both among the soldiers and also Agamemnon's own self-doubt as well, which prompted him to test the army in the first place. This doubt will prove to be well-founded. I don't want to give away the upcoming 22 books of the Iliad, but the fact that there are so many books ahead of us now that Achilles has withdrawn his support of the Greeks must surely imply to you that it's not going to be an easy road ahead for the Greeks. But now that the narrator has allowed Thersites to reinforce these themes for him, we're done with him. Odysseus still has Agamemnon's beatdown scepter in hand, and he's ready to use it. But goodly Odysseus came straight to Thersites' side, and looking sternly at him with hard words rebuked him. Thersites, reckless in words, shrill orator though thou art, refrain thyself, nor aim to strive singly against kings. For I deem that no mortal is baser than thou of all that with the sons of Atreus came before Ilios. Therefore were it well that thou shouldst not have kings in thy mouth as thou talkest, and utter revilings against them, and be on the watch for departure. We know not yet clearly how these things shall be, whether we sons of the Achaeans shall return for good or ill. Therefore now dost thou revile continually Agamemnon son of Atreus, shepherd of the host, because the Danaan warriors give him many gifts, and so thou talkest tauntingly. But I will tell thee plain, and that I say shall even be brought to pass. If I find thee again raving as thou now art, then may Odysseus' head no longer abide upon his shoulders, nor may any more I be called father of Telemachus, if I take thee not, and strip from thee thy garments, thy mantle and tunic that cover thy nakedness, and for thyself send thee weeping to the fleet ships, and beat thee out of the assembly with shameful blows. So spake he, and with his staff smote his back and shoulders. And he bowed down, and a big tear fell from him, and a bloody weal stood up from his back beneath the golden scepter. Then he sat down and was amazed, and in pain with helpless look wiped away the tear. But the rest, though they were sorry, laughed lightly at him, and thus would one speak looking at another standing by. Go to, of a truth Odysseus has wrought good deeds without number ere now, standing foremost in wise counsels, and setting battle in array. But now is this thing the best by far that has been wrought among the Argives, to wit, that he has stayed this prating railer from his harangues. Never again, forsooth, will his proud soul henceforth bid him revile the kings with slanderous words. Odysseus, still holding that royal scepter, beats Thersites with it, and the men all laugh to see Thersites get beaten. It was a cruel society in a lot of ways, and this cruelty to Thersites now is a unifying force that suppresses the valid points against the war that Achilles had first brought up in Book 1, and which Thersites was repeating here in Book 2. The political discourse and the last shreds of a mutiny are over. Now, Athene appears beside Odysseus, visible to all the men, but in the form of a herald, ordering all the men to keep silent. And quickly under the gaze of Athene's bright eyes, the laughter and commotion following the beating of Thersites dies down. Yes, the threat of a mutiny is over, but Athene wants more than that. She wants the Greeks to press forward into battle. It will again be Odysseus who gets things back on track, in a speech which starts out seemingly a continuation of the Agamemnon bashing that's been so popular of late. But Odysseus only begins there. It's worth bringing forward here a description of Odysseus as an orator that comes a little later in Book 3, where the Trojan ally Antenor is describing Odysseus to Priam, the king of Troy. There, Antenor says that Odysseus is less tall than Menelaus, but with broader shoulders, and that whenever Odysseus first stands to speak, he looks down upon the ground, and he holds his staff stiffly. It's not a good first impression Odysseus gives. But when, Antenor says, he uttered his great voice from his chest, and words like unto the snowflakes of winter, then marveled we not thus to behold Odysseus's aspect. Odysseus's rough appearance and awkward presence only serve to lure listeners in. They become captivated by his voice and his marvelously persuasive arguments. Showing why he is truly the master orator of the Greeks, Odysseus first sympathizes with those who doubt Agamemnon, but gradually he widens his focus, reminding them all that the mission they are on is bigger than Agamemnon and has a heavenly promise of success upon it. And by his side, bright-eyed Athene, in the likeness of a herald, bade the multitude keep silence, that the sons of the Achaeans, both the nearest and the farthest, might hear his words together and give heed to his counsel. He of good intent made harangue to them and said, Atreides, now surely are the Achaeans for making thee, O king, most despised among all mortal men. Nor will they fulfill the promise that they pledged thee when they were still marching hither from horse-pasturing Argos, that thou shouldst not return till thou hast laid well-wide Ilios waste. For like young children or widow women do they wail each to the other of returning home. Yea, here is toil to make a man depart disheartened. For he that stayeth away but one single month far from his wife in his benched ship fretteth himself when winter storms and the furious sea imprison him. But for us, the 9th year of our stay here is upon us in its course. Therefore do I not marvel that the Achaeans should fret beside their beaked ships. Yet nevertheless is it shameful to wait long and depart empty. Be of good heart, my friends, and wait a while, until we learn whether Calchas be indeed a seer or no. For this thing verily we know well in our hearts, and ye are all witnesses thereof, even as many as the fates of death have not yet borne away. It was as it were but yesterday, or the day before, that the Achaeans' ships were gathering in Aulis, freighted with trouble for Priam and the Trojans, and we round about a spring were offering on the holy altars unblemished hecatombs to the immortals, beneath a fair plane tree, whence flowed bright water, when there was seen a great portent, a snake blood red on the back, terrible, whom the god of Olympus himself had sent forth to the light of day, sprang from beneath the altar and darted to the plane tree. Now there were the brood of a sparrow, tender little ones, upon the topmost branch, nestling beneath the leaves. 8 were they, and the mother of the little ones was the 9th. And the snake swallowed these cheeping pitifully. And the mother fluttered around, wailing for her dear little ones. But he coiled himself and caught her by the wing as she screamed about him. Now when he had swallowed the sparrow's little ones and the mother with them, the god who revealed him made of him a sign. For the son of crooked counseling Cronos turned him to stone, and we stood by and marveled to see what was done. So when the dread portent brake in upon the hecatombs of the gods, then did Calchas forthwith prophesy, and said, Why hold ye your peace, ye flowing-haired Achaeans? To us hath Zeus the counselor shown this great sign, late come, of late fulfillment, the fame whereof shall never perish. Even as he swallowed the sparrow's little ones and herself, the 8 wherewith the mother that bare the little ones was the 9th, so shall we war there for so many years. But in the 10th year shall we take the wide-wayed city. So spake the seer, and now are all these things being fulfilled. So come, abide ye all, ye well-grieved Achaeans, even where ye are, until we have taken the great city of Priam. The Argives shouted aloud, and all round the ships echoed terribly to the voice of the Achaeans as they praised the saying of godlike Odysseus. Odysseus, in this brilliant speech, has turned the tide and has gotten the men who were only very recently ready to abandon the war. He's gotten them to be enthusiastic to continue it and to run right into battle. He started out by voicing the very same concerns he had just beat Thersites for voicing, addressing Agamemnon directly at the beginning of the speech. Odysseus says the men think Odysseus the most blameworthy of men, and he sympathizes with the men for their longing to go home, that even 1 month away from their wives and homes is hard, much less these 9 long years. But, he says, it's shameful to leave empty-handed, to return home now with nothing to show for these 9 years away. And he reminds the men of the previous prophecy that Calchas had conveyed to them before they even left Greece, that the war would indeed go on for 9 years before victory in the 10th. Why not see if the prophecy is true? Our victory has been promised to us by heaven. The fact that it's been 9 years without victory seems to validate the prophecy so far, and all of this is being accomplished right before our eyes. We're so close now to our promised victory. Won't you stay with us? And together we'll take the rich city of Troy and all its treasures. The old knight Nestor steps forward, now that the crowd is warmed up, to give a more traditional rousing the army for battle speech. It's a bit rambly, but honestly for old Nestor, it's pretty good. He gets to the point and without any reference to marginally relevant stories of the past. And then spake among them knightly Nestor of Gerenia. Out on it, in very truth ye hold assembly, like silly boys that have no care for deeds of war. What shall come of our covenants and our oaths? Let all counsels be cast into the fire, and all devices of warriors, and the pure drink offerings, and the right hands of fellowship wherein we trusted. For we are vainly striving with words, nor can we find any device at all, For all our long tarrying here, son of Atreus, do thou still, as erst, keep steadfast purpose and lead the Argives amid the violent fray? And for these, let them perish, the one or two Achaeans that take secret counsel, though fulfillment shall not come thereof, to depart to Argos first, before they know whether the promise of Aegis-bearing Zeus be a lie or no. Yea, for I say that most mighty Cronion pledged us his word that day when the Argives embarked upon their fleet ships, bearing unto the Trojans death and fate. For by his lightning upon our right he manifested signs of good. Therefore let no man hasten to depart home, till each have lain by some Trojan's wife, and paid back his strivings and groans for Helen's sake. But if any man is overmuch desirous to depart homewards, let him lay his hand upon his decked black ship, that before all men he may encounter death and fate. But to thou, my king, take good counsel thyself, and hearken to another that shall give it. The word that I speak, whate'er it be, shall not be cast away. Separate thy warriors by tribes and by clans, Agamemnon, that clan may give aid to clan and tribe to tribe. If thou do thus, and the Achaeans hearken to thee, then wilt thou know who among thy captains, and who of the common sort, is a coward, and who too is brave, for they will fight each after their sort. So wilt thou know whether it is even by divine command that thou shalt not take the city, or by the baseness of thy warriors and their ill skill in battle. Nestor's attempt at a rousing speech ends here with encouraging Agamemnon to divide the troops by their homeland for various reasons related to identifying who is brave and who is cowardly, in some effort to determine if it's divine will or lousy warriors that's the problem in the event they don't take Troy today. Agamemnon, in his own speech to follow, will praise Nestor for this odd bit of advice. I'll mention my own personal opinion that we don't get a lot of actual wisdom out of Nestor, and he comes across to me as something of a comic relief character. Agamemnon now finally gives his pre-battle pep talk, crediting Nestor alone and failing entirely to recognize the far more important role Odysseus played in turning things around for him. Verily hast thou again outdone the sons of the Achaeans in speech, old man. Ah, Father Zeus and Athenian Apollo, would that among the Achaeans I had 10 such counselors. Then would the city of King Priam soon bow beneath our hands, captive and wasted. But Aegis-bearing Zeus, the son of Cronos, hath brought sorrows upon me, in that he casteth my lot amid fruitless wranglings and strifes. For in truth I and Achilles fought about a damsel with violent words, and I was first to be angry. But if we can only be at one in council, then there will be no more any putting off the day of evil for the Trojans. No, not for an instant. But now go ye to your meal, that we may join battle. Let each man sharpen well his spear, and bestow well his shield. And let him well give his fleet-footed steeds their meal, and look well to his chariot on every side, and take thought for battle, that all day long we may contend in hateful war. For if respite shall there intervene, no, not a whit, only that the coming of night shall part the fury of warriors. On each man's breast shall the baldric of his covering shield be wet with sweat, and his hand shall grow faint about the spear, and each man's horse shall sweat as he draweth the polished chariot. And whomsoever I perceive minded to tarry far from the fight beneath the beaked ships, for him shall there be no hope hereafter to escape the dogs and birds of prey. So spake he, and the Argives shouted aloud, like to a wave on a steep shore, when the south wind cometh and stirreth it, even on a jutting rock, that is never left at peace by the waves of all the winds that rise from this side and from that. With Agamemnon's test finally over, and the men enthusiastically on board with continuing the war, the army now disperses to their various parts of camp to eat and then to get ready for battle. Agamemnon now will observe the appropriate religious rituals to ensure their victory. Remember, Agamemnon is still under the illusion that Zeus has promised he will take the city of Troy today, because of that false dream Zeus sent him at the beginning of Book 2. Keep that in mind once Agamemnon prays to Zeus for victory. And they stood up and scattered in haste throughout the ships, and made fires in the huts and took their meal. And they did sacrifice each man to one of the everlasting gods, praying for escape from death and the tumult of battle. But Agamemnon, king of men, slew a fat bull of 5 years to most mighty Cronion, and called the elders, the princes of the Achaean host, Nestor first, and King Idomeneus, and then the two Iantes, and Tydeus' son, and sixthly Odysseus, peer of Zeus in council. And Menelaus of the loud war cry came to him unbidden, for he knew in his heart how his brother toiled. Then stood they around the bull, and took the barley meal. And Agamemnon made his prayer in their midst, and said, Zeus, most glorious, most great, God of the storm cloud, that dwellest in the heaven, vouchsafe that the sun set not upon us, nor the darkness come near, till I have laid low upon the earth Priam's palace, smirched with smoke, and burnt the doorways thereof with consuming fire, and rent on Hector's breast his doublet cleft with the blade, and about him may full many of his comrades, prone in the dust, bite the earth. So spake he, but not as yet would Cronion grant him fulfillment. He accepted the sacrifice, but made toil to wax unceasingly. Now when they had prayed and scattered the barley meal, they first drew back the bull's head, and cut his throat, and flayed him, and cut slices from the thighs, and wrapped them in fat, making a double fold, and laid raw collops thereon. And these they burnt on cleft wood stripped of leaves, and spitted the vitals, and held them over Hephaestus' flame. Now when the thighs were burnt, and they had tasted the vitals, then sliced they all the rest, and pierced it through with spits, and roasted it carefully, and drew all off again. So when they had rest from the task, and had made ready the banquet, they feasted, nor was their heart aught stinted of the fair banquet. With the religious sacrifice over, and Agamemnon incorrectly believing his prayer for victory is assured, Nestor now advises Agamemnon to gather the men for battle. But when they had put away from them the desire of meat and drink, then did knightly Nestor of Gerenia open his saying to them, Most noble son of Atreus, Agamemnon king of men, let us not any more hold long converse here, nor for long delay the work that God putteth in our hands. But come, let the heralds of the mail-clad Achaeans make proclamation to the folk, and gather them throughout the ships. And let us go thus in concert through the wide host of the Achaeans, that the speedier we may arouse keen war. Finally, Athene returns, this time bearing the aegis. It's not clear if she's actually visible to the men, and if she is visible, no particular form is given. The gods appear throughout the Iliad in various forms or as themselves, visible and invisible. Sometimes they're recognized even if disguised, sometimes not. In this case, what's important is the effect Athene's presence and that of the aegis has on the Greeks. The aegis is something of a mysterious object. It's variously described as either a shield or a goat skin. It sometimes has the head of a gorgon on it. Here, no gorgon head is mentioned. The aegis is usually mentioned in relation to Zeus himself or to Athene, and once in the Iliad, it's carried by Apollo. Here, the aegis is described as having tassels of gold. It often serves to incite strong feelings during battle, fear in the enemy, or in this case, excitement for battle among the allies of the god. And it's by shaking the aegis that the god carrying it incites these strong emotions related to battle. The Greek army is marshaled for the first battle of the Iliad, the first battle they will experience without the aid of their greatest warrior Achilles. Agamemnon now orders the march. Straight away, Agamemnon bade the clear-voiced heralds summon to battle the flowing-haired Achaeans. So those summoned, and these gathered with all speed, and the kings, the fosterlings of Zeus that were about Atreus' son, eagerly marshaled them, and bright-eyed Athene in the midst, bearing the holy aegis that knoweth neither age nor death, whereon wave 100 tassels of pure gold, all deftly woven, and each one 100 oxen worth. Therewith she passed, dazzling through the Achaean folk, urging them forth, and in every man's heart she roused strength to battle without ceasing and to fight. So was war made sweeter to them than to depart in their hollow ships to their dear native land. Even as ravaging fire kindleth a boundless forest on a mountain's peaks, and the blaze is seen from afar, even so as they marched went the dazzling gleam from the innumerable bronze throughout the sky, even unto the heavens. And as the many tribes of feathered birds, wild geese or cranes or long-necked swans, on the Asian mead by Castros' stream, fly hither and thither, joying in their plumage, and with loud cries settle ever onwards, and the mead resounds, Even so poured forth the many tribes of warriors from ships and huts into the Scamandrian plain, and the earth echoed terribly beneath the tread of men and horses. So stood they in the flowering Scamandrian plain, unnumbered as are leaves and flowers in their seasons. Even as the many tribes of thick flies that hover about a herdsman's steading in the spring season, when milk drencheth the pails. Even in like number stood the flowing-haired Achaeans upon the plain in the face of the Trojans, eager to rend them asunder. And even as the goatherds easily divide the ranging flocks of goats when they mingle in the pasture, so did their captains marshal them on this side and on that, to enter into the fray, and in their midst Lord Agamemnon, his head and eyes like unto Zeus, whose joy is in the thunder, and his waist like unto Ares, and his breast unto Poseidon. Even as a bull standeth out far foremost amidst the herd, for he is preeminent amid the pasturing kine. Even such did Zeus make Atrides on that day, preeminent among many and chief amid heroes. The Greeks are led, for the first time in the Iliad, out of their camp, to battle on the plains between their beach camp and the walls of Troy. The Trojans are there to meet them. We are ready for the first battle of the Iliad. But the battle will have to wait until Book 3. Now we have the catalog of ships. Yes, the catalog of ships. Why read about an exciting battle after 2 books of talking and arguing, when you can read a list of which Greeks came from which cities and with how many ships? Oh, and then a list of the Trojans and their allies. If you're reading the Iliad and using this podcast series to accompany your reading, I'd say feel free to skip the catalog if it's too dry for you. This is the only section anything like it in the Iliad. However, the catalog of ships was actually a very important part of the Iliad to its original listeners, those people in the classical age of ancient Greece for whom the Iliad wasn't just a piece of fiction, but a touchstone to their own cultural history. This listing of leaders and ships and which cities they all came from was a point of pride for them, a way to feel connected to this story that was framed as history to them. The importance of the catalog of ships to the people of ancient Greece is well known. Let's talk about the catalog a bit, as it has even more aspects about it which make it important even today, and which make its appearance here, seemingly tacked on to the end of Book 2, more purposeful than it might appear to be. In an article titled Common People and Leaders in Iliad Book 2, The Invocation of the Muses and the Catalog of Ships, author Haydn makes 3 arguments about the placement of the catalog of ships here at the end of Book 2. First, Haydn says it continues the theme of Book 2, which has been all about the mustering of the army to battle, from Agamemnon's dream about leading the troops into victory today, to the testing of the army's resolve, to the arguments by Thersites against the war, and those of Odysseus and Nestor in favor of the war. Book 2 has just been a long preparation for this mustering, which we've finally seen, and which the catalog provides a who's who list of. Secondly, Haydn argues that the structure of the catalog points to its role as a celebration of the troops themselves. Unlike just about the entire rest of the Iliad, Book 2 in general, and the catalog specifically, focuses on the common soldiers rather than the big-name heroes like Agamemnon, Odysseus, the Aiases, and of course Achilles. It's interesting to note the catalog is arranged geographically, seemingly without regard for the hometowns of the great heroes. There is also a peculiar focus on and strange arrangements of the towns in the Boeotia region of Greece, which includes the very odd omission of Boeotia's most important city, Thebes. Let's go on a tangent within a tangent to talk about Thebes' absence from the catalog. Authors Evans and Jasnow, in their paper titled Mapping Homer's Catalog of Ships, plotted the listed Boeotian towns out on a map and discovered that they're arranged in a circle around the city of Thebes, as if the narrator were standing within Thebes and pointing to all the surrounding towns one by one. They speculate that this structure belies some origin of this portion of the catalog from some older piece of literature that was itself focused upon Thebes, rather than coming originally from a Trojan War-focused work. And possibly this portion of the catalog is a lost fragment of the Seven Against Thebes, a story set in the generation of heroes before those of the Trojan War. We don't have an ancient Greek version of the Seven Against Thebes. What we do have is a much more recent, dating to the 1st century CE version written by the Roman author Statius. It is a worthy read, but it's not ancient Greek. Finally, Haydn's third point about the catalog is it is only here that Homer consistently uses verbiage implying a marching of men across land. Outside the catalog, Haydn says the imagery and wording is more consistent with naval engagements, despite the lack of any naval warfare within the Iliad. And this may also point to a different origin for some of this text within the catalog. Now, since I went off on a long tangent about the catalog without having any really good segue back toward concluding my coverage of Book 2, I decided this is as good a place as any to insert this next tangent that I haven't been able to seamlessly place anywhere, but which I feel is important to address before we get any deeper into the Iliad. Throughout this series, I'm sure you've already noticed the text referring to the Greeks variously as Achaeans, Danaans, and Argives. Traditionally, these three terms are considered interchangeable, as if they all refer simply to the Greeks as a whole, and that is how you can interpret them in this series. But according to author Androniki Oikonomaki in his paper Achaioi, Argaioi, Danaioi, Revisiting the System of Denomination of the Greeks in the Homeric Epics, these three terms each did have their own meanings originally. Argives refers to people from Argos, a city northeast of Sparta. The other two terms, Achaeans and Danaans, seem to have differing meanings both to the ancients and to us now. To the ancients, coming to the Iliad in subsequent centuries as a document that provides a history of the unification of the Greek-speaking peoples, the term Achaeans referred to descendants of a mythological figure named Achaeus, grandson of the Hellen with two L's, for whom the Hellenic peoples are named, and to this day the formal name of Greece is still the Hellenic Republic. Similarly, Danaans were descendants of the mythological figure named Danaus. Danaus is said to have lived in Libya with his 50 daughters, and his twin brother was Aegyptus, king of Egypt, who decided that his 50 sons should marry Danaus's 50 daughters. Danaus did not like that idea, and Athene advised him on how to build the world's first ship, which he used to escape with his 50 daughters and found the city of Argos in southern Greece. The term Achaeans seems to refer either to a tribe in Thessaly or to the region of Achaia in the Peloponnese. The terms Danaans and Achaeans are both found in the records of neighboring cultures such as the Hittites and the Egyptians, and in all likelihood they refer to early kingdoms of Greek-speaking peoples, with these legendary founders as later additions to explain the names. For our purposes, reading the Iliad many centuries later, we can simply do what readers have been doing for a long time and use these three terms, Argives, Achaeans, and Danaans, interchangeably. Okay, that's it. That's Book 2. I mean, I guess I could read the catalog out to you, but is that what you want? No, I can't imagine that you do. Okay, how about this? I'll do my usual sign-off and set up for the next episode, and then I'll record a fadeaway of myself reading just the beginning of the catalog. How does that sound? Next time, we'll cover Book 3, which is finally exactly what you expect of the Iliad: battle, a duel, and divine intervention. It's also our closest look at the woman who is at the heart of this war, Helen. So in Book 3, we will also have a thorough and thoughtful examination of the daughter of Zeus. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening. Of the Boeotians, Peneleos and Leitos were captains, and Arcesilaus, and Prothoenor, and Clonios. These were they that dwelt in Hyria, and rocky Aulis, and Skoinos, and Skolos, and Etionos full of ridges, Thespia, and Graia, and Mycalesos with wide lawns, and that dwelt about Harma, and Ilesion, and Erythrae, and they that possessed Elion, and Petion, and Hyle, Ocalea, and the established fortress of Melion, Cope, Eutresis, and Thisbe, haunt of doves, and they of Coronea and grassy Haliartos, and that possessed Plataea, and that dwelt in Glisas, and that possessed the established fortress of lesser Thebes, and holy Onchestos, Poseidon's bright grove, and that possessed Arne rich in vineyards, in Media, and sacred Nysa, and Thedon, on the furthest borders. Of these there came 50 ships, and in each one embarked young men of the Boeotians, 120. And they that dwelt at Naspladon, and Orchomenos of the Minyae, were led of Ascalaphos and Ealmenos, sons of Ares, whom Asteoche conceived of the mighty god in the palace of Actor, son of Asius, having entered her upper chamber, a stately maiden, for mighty Ares lay with her privily, and with them sailed 30 hollow ships. And the Phocians were led of Skydios and Epistrophos, sons of great-hearted Iphitos, son of Naublos. These were they that possessed Kyparissos and rocky Pytho, and sacred Crisa, and Daulis, and Panopeus, and they that dwelt about Anamorea, and Hyampolis, yea, and they that lived by the goodly river Kephisos, and possessed Lilia by Kephisos' springs, and with them followed 40 black ships. So they marshalled the ranks of the Phocians diligently, and had their station hard by the Boeotians on the left. Of the Boeotians, Peneleos and Lytos were captains, and Archesilaus, and Prothoenor, and Clonius. These were they that dwelt in Hyria, and rocky Aulis,